This evening's session, Katie's asked me to talk about the four marks of the church. And the four marks of the church are, as we recite in the creed, that the church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. And I think it's important to remember these four marks because in many ways, they give an antidote to the kind of poison in our society. In our society, we see an increasing amount of division and strife. We see things crumbling and falling apart. Everyone seems to be at each other's throats for all sorts of reasons in social media, in politics and economics and education, in all sorts of ways. And the church's four marks of being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic help to address all of this. So I think one of the best ways to actually approach this is to look at some of the problems in our modern society and see how one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic actually address these problems, the division, the strife, and the sort of crumbling apart that we see in society. And so I'd like to lay out four different isms or ideologies, four sort of problems in society, and then show how the church, being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, actually addresses these and helps to build up ourselves as individuals, as a community, and as a society. I should say, however, that these solutions are not simply based on what is good for society. These solutions, as I go through them, you'll see actually have personal applications as well as societal applications. In other words, these four things that are wrong with the society are also wrong with me. Okay, so being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic helps to address the problems in society, but also addresses the problems in me. So this is a lived experience. It's not just theory. And I hope that RCIA, as we move forward, will continue to be that for you, a lived experience and something which you participate in rather than simply receiving theoretical knowledge about the Catholic Church. So I'll be going through these four traits, first of all, and then finishing with the traits of authority in the Catholic Church and why the Catholic Church's authority is so impressive and one which is convincing for individuals and for our society. So the first sort of ism that I would like to discuss is individualism. And in our society in America, we are taught to love the rugged individual, the rugged individualist, you know, the man or the woman who sets out to accomplish some great thing and with great ingenuity or great inventiveness or great brains or great courage or a combination of all these things accomplishes something great and wonderful. We admire these inventors, these geniuses, these rugged individualists who are able to break the mold and go and do something wonderful. This is not the kind of individualism I'm criticizing. What I'm criticizing is the kind of individualism which says it's my way or the highway. One of the stories I used to illustrate this, which is kind of amusing, is that when I was in England as an Anglican priest, the funerals were usually taken at the state crematorium. And this was a sort of municipal type building where most of the people went to be cremated and have their funeral service. And as an Anglican priest, the Anglican Church is the established church. So they would call us to take a lot of these funerals for people who really had no faith and were not members of our church, but might have been members of our wider community. So we would go and take these funerals. And a friend of mine later said that statistically, the most popular music to be played at funerals in England is Frank Sinatra's My Way. And in these crematoria, you would have the family could choose some recorded music which would be played, and the minister would push a button to play the music, and then there was another button which he would push, after which a curtain would come across in front of the coffin to give the family kind of closure and so forth. And so my friend said, having a sense of the dramatic, when he officiates at these funerals, he would push the button and Frank Sinatra would start singing My Way. But he would wait until Frank sang that line about the final curtain before he pushed the second button. So the idea that Frank Sinatra's My Way is actually used as a funeral anthem is a kind of symbol of our modern society and individualism in our society, which says, sort of enshrines every person's choice as kind of sacred and every person's individual decision as sacred. And this individualism, which is sort of written into the American lifestyle and into the American dream, is one of the things which has caused so much division and so much strife, because of course, individuals on their own soon bump up against other individuals on their own, and opinions clash and personalities clash and ideas clash and wills clash. And before long, any sense of unity or any sense of oneness is gone. And so this individualism, which is so rife in our society, in which it's enshrined as a kind of sacred sort of right to make your choice, and whatever choice you make is the right choice just because you made that choice, is countered by the Catholic Church's quality of being one. Now, when we say the Catholic Church is one, we don't mean that everybody in the Catholic Church agrees, okay? If you come into the church at Easter, you will soon realize that Catholics, like all good families, have plenty of quarrels going on, okay? There's plenty of difference of opinion. And it's easy, it's been said many times that we have unity, even though we do not have uniformity. Okay, uniformity is where everybody has to be absolutely alike, wearing the same clothes, walking in lockstep, a kind of imposed uniformity by force. We do not have uniformity, but we do have unity. And the unity that we have draws us together as one, sharing the same beliefs and sharing the same worldview and sharing the same moral teachings. And this is the unity that holds us together. In John chapter 17, Jesus actually prayed that all of his disciples would be one as he and the Father are one. And so this quality of being one in the Catholic Church is actually linked back with the unity or the oneness that we find in God, the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So the Holy Trinity is meant to be for us an example or a picture of diversity and unity together, and how the diverse elements actually come together to form a unity. The other image, which is in the New Testament, is when St. Paul says that we are the body of Christ. And he uses the image of the body, and knowing enough about biology nowadays, which he never knew, is of course that our bodies are made up of many, many different cells. And each one of these cells contributes to the unity of the body. And the unity of the body is what's important. And St. Paul says it in a different way. He says that the eye cannot say to the foot, I do not need you. And likewise, any body part is necessary for the unity in the body. So when we say that the church is one, we're talking about this essential unity that draws us all together. And this oneness is put as the first of the four qualities of the church, because in many ways, it actually inspires and it gives life to the other three, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So when we say that the church is one, that is its core ingredient, that it's one, although it's many. If you come into Our Lady of the Rosary Church and look at the artwork, which is over the central door as you come in, you will see that around the central figure of Christ with the angels on either side, the artist has put he's put some pomegranates and some roses. The pomegranates are split open so that you can see the many seeds on the inside, because the pomegranate is an ancient symbol for the church. In many, one. And so when you see those pomegranates, you can think of that quality of the church, that the church is one. The second quality of the church is countered in our world today by materialism. Now, materialism is not just going to the mall to shop until you drop. Materialism is the underlying philosophy that your material things are all you need. Okay, the philosophy of materialism is the belief that there is no heaven or hell, no afterlife, no angels or demons, and therefore no God. So materialism is basically an atheistic philosophy, believing that what you see is what you get. This material world is all there is. When you die, it's a flat line, there's nothing else, that's it. And so therefore, the result of materialism, and one of the symptoms of materialism, is greed and acquisitiveness. I have to get as much stuff as I possibly can because this is all that matters. I need to get as much money as I possibly can gather because this is all there is. And I better get it soon because somebody else is going after it as well. Those are the symptoms of materialism. But the underlying philosophy of materialism is that this material world is all there is. There is nothing else. So you better get used to it. Now, the church's second quality is that of being holy. And when we use the word holy, we tend to think of someone who's very pious. The saints are holy. A person who prays a lot is holy. Well, yes, but I like to think of the quality of the church being holy as something a bit different than that. And that is that the church is supernatural. The holiness of the church is an indication of the church's supernatural quality. So countering materialism, which says this material world is all there is, when we say that the church is holy, we are saying, no, actually, we believe in the transcendental realm. We believe in the other world. We believe in an invisible realm, which is more permanent and more lasting than this material realm. And when we say that the church is holy, we mean that she has a supernatural origin and a supernatural destiny. What do we mean? What do we mean by that? Well, we mean, therefore, that the church was not just created as a human invention. This is a materialistic misunderstanding of the Christian church. You will hear people say, "Oh, well, the church was just made up by men, okay, and these are just human rules and regulations. Therefore, you can disregard it. It was made 2,000 years ago by a bunch of men who just thought it up." This is not Catholic, okay? This is some other false religion. The Catholic Church teaches that we are one, but we are also holy. In other words, the church was established supernaturally by God through the direct invention and the direct decree of Jesus Christ, God's Son, and that the entire thing is built on and founded on a supernatural foundation, not a natural man-made time-limited dimension, but that the church is holy because it's actually inspired by the Holy Spirit, built by the Holy Spirit, put together by God, designed by God, and held together by God by supernatural power. So this is a crucial part of actually becoming a Catholic, is having a supernatural vision of the church and a supernatural vision of reality. Now, the way this holiness actually works in the church is through the sacraments, which we will be going through step by step as RCIA continues. But to really understand the Catholic Church, one needs to have what I call the sacramental vision. And the sacramental vision basically is saying that God chooses to work his way in the world. God chooses to work his way in my life. God chooses to work his way in the church through physical means. In other words, materialism is not all there is, but it is through the material world that God actually sees fit to work in the world and pour himself into the world through his supernatural graces and through his supernatural gifts. So when we talk about the sacraments, we will say, for instance, that it is in the Eucharist, it is through bread and wine that God actually, combined with our faith in what he's doing, actually pours his power and grace into the world. And that it's not just a symbol, it's not just a sign, it's not just a good idea, but that this is real and it's actually physical and God working through the physical realm. Now, we believe this because of who we believe Jesus Christ is. And we'll get into this again in more detail later, but Jesus Christ, God's Son, comes into the world and takes flesh of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That means he takes her flesh and becomes born in her womb and takes her genetic code and actually takes her physicality. And this core belief of the incarnation, or the taking flesh of God, is the underlying belief that God's supernatural work is in the world through the material world, and that therefore the church is holy because he's still doing this in the world through the church. We say that the church is God's sacrament of salvation in the world. In other words, the church is the way he's doing his work in the world today. And studying the history of the church is quite an amazing thing. It's one of my special interests is studying the history of the church, and to see how God has worked through the church over the last 2,000 years, step by step, not despite all of the human frailties and failures, but also through the human frailties and failures. God has continued his work in the world in a wonderful and powerful way. So therefore, when we say that the church is holy, We're saying that the church is God's means of working his supernatural way in the world, in a way that is visible and tangible, and a way that we can actually participate and share in, because we too have material bodies, physical bodies. So we say the church is one. There is this underlying unity, which is grounded in the unity of God himself. And then we say that the church is holy because it is God's supernatural work in the world through the material world, which counters the philosophy of materialism, which says there is nothing other than this material realm. The third quality of the church is that the church is Catholic. And the word Catholic actually means universal. And the problem in the modern world, which this counters, is the problem of tribalism. Tribalism is something we're seeing all around us in our society. Basically, tribalism is made up of individuals who find other individuals like themselves, and they form a tribe. A tribe has certain qualities and characteristics. A tribe is always self-referential. In other words, it looks in on itself and it looks in on its members, and it is therefore determined by itself, not by anything greater than itself. And a tribe can exist in many, many different guises in our society. You can have political tribes, you can have economic tribes, you can have religious tribes, you can have tribes based on gender and sex, you can have tribes based on ethnicity, you can have tribes based on almost any shared interest. These tribes can be sometimes harmless and just almost like groups of hobby enthusiasts, but tribes also in our society recently have become extremely noxious. So when you see political tribes getting together and becoming activists on whatever cause they're being activists about, that's tribalism at work. One of the other traits of tribalism is that tribalism always, because it's self-referential and self-righteous, is always blaming somebody else. So a tribe gets together and it's always somebody else's fault. It's the Republicans' fault. It's the Democrats' fault. It's the white people's fault. It's the black people's fault. It's the rich people's fault. It's the poor people's fault. Whoever, the tribal members are always looking in on themselves, licking their wounds, feeling resentful, and then blaming somebody else for their problem. When you see that happening in society, you're seeing tribalism at work. And it's everywhere in our society. And the Catholic Church's answer to that is to be Catholic. This is the third mark of the church. To be one, to be holy, and to be Catholic. Catholic means universal, meaning that we have a brotherhood, a family, a brotherhood of brothers and sisters around the world who share in this trait of being one with us and sharing in the trait of belonging to the Catholic Church. So you'll often hear Catholics say how excited they were after they soon came into the church in Greenville, South Carolina, we'll say, and they traveled to France, and they'll say to me, "Father, it was great. I went to Mass in St. Peter's in Italy, or I went to Mass in a cathedral in France, and even though it was in French, I understood everything." I said, "Well, of course you did, because it's the Mass, and we're one, and we're holy, and we're Catholic. It's universal. It's everywhere in the world." And, you know, in the world today, as there has always been, there are people who are trying to say, well, let's have a one world government. Let's have one world brotherhood of man in which we all get together and we live in peace together. Beautiful. And I say it already exists. It's called the Catholic Church. Everywhere you go around the world, you will find the Catholic Church, whether it's a little grass hut in Africa where the priest bicycles in 50 miles to say Mass for the people, and it's crowded with lots of young people and children, and the Mass is on a dirt floor, and it's as simple as can be, or whether it's some grand cathedral in France, Spain, or Italy, where the Mass is being celebrated and Catholics are gathering because we are one, we're holy, and we're Catholic, we're universal. Now, this universality extends in various different ways. First of all, it extends geographically. Like I've just said, wherever you go around the globe, you will find the Catholic Church. If it's Sunday and you're somewhere around the world, take a moment. You have an obligation to go to Mass, go and find the Catholic Church, and there will be one there that you can find. Even if you go to Muslim countries, and if you go to countries like China If you take time, you will be able to find the Catholic Church and go to Mass on a Sunday. This universality, or Catholicity, as we call it, is not only geographical, but it is also chronological. In other words, it extends down through across the globe geographically, but it also extends down the timeline for the last not only 2,000 years, but connecting in with the Hebrew religion back for another 2,000 or 3,000 years to the dawn of history. And so when you look at the Catholicity or the universality of the Catholic Church, you're talking about a universality that is geographical and a universality which is chronological. One of the great converts to Catholicism said that when he was in college, he was a very smart guy. When he was in college, he came from a completely unchurched background. He said, I decided in college that I needed to have a unified belief system, which gathered up philosophy, psychology, sexuality, economics, politics, history, theology, everything together. And he began to construct it by his studies in all these different realms. He began to read and began to piece it together, a cohesive, coherent belief system for life. And then he sort of writes, and then he said, I did a bit more reading and a bit more research, and I realized that somebody had already done this. It was called the Catholic Church. So this universality is geographical, it's historical, but it is also a Catholicity which is intellectual. In other words, the universality covers every aspect of human life. You will find as you're a Catholic that the Catholic Church has reached into every area of human life, that the Catholic Church comments on politics, on economics. Of course, the Catholic Church has the great riches of art and architecture and music. Also, it's touched on all the different cultures around the world. And in this way, the universality or the Catholicity is geographical, it's historical or chronological, and it is also intellectual. In other words, it covers every different aspect of human life. So if you were to pull, I guarantee you, if you were to pull out almost any sort of aspect of human life and ask me to say where Catholicism touches on that or sheds light on it, I would be able to say, oh yes, well, there is this person or that person, this scientist, this philosopher, this ethicist, this politician, this economist, this artist, this sculptor, this painter, this poet, this novelist. All of them had the Catholic faith and brought their Catholic faith to bear on these aspects of human life, something which no other religion and certainly no other Christian denomination can actually boast of. So when we talk about the Catholicity of the Church being Catholic, it's all embracing, it's huge, it's universal in these three different ways. I'm rattling through this, and I'm aware that I'm speaking very rapidly, and I'm sorry for that, but we are going to leave some time afterwards for some questions, and I hope that you'll have some questions for me as we move forward. The fourth quality of the Church is that it is apostolic. We say in the Creed, the Church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. By apostolic, we mean that it is the faith which is delivered to us from the apostles. And this is a very important aspect because, again, we say that this wasn't made up by human beings. This wasn't just cooked up by some people who got together and said, I know, let's make a new religion. We believe that the apostolic authority of the Church comes direct from Jesus. Jesus said to his apostles, if you remember in John's Gospel, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And then he breathed on them the Holy Spirit. Now, this verse is very important because the word apostle actually means sent ones, one who is sent. So when Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you, he's basically saying, I have come from God who sent me to earth to teach the truth, to heal the sick, to liberate those who are bound by evil, and to redeem the world by my suffering and resurrection. And as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. So the Catholic Church believes that by direct authority from God to Jesus and from Jesus to his apostles, the truth has been given to the world to be able to understand and to be able to accept for our soul's salvation. And that this apostolic authority, which Jesus gives to his 12 apostles, is handed down from them to their successors. We actually find this happening in the New Testament, where St. Paul, for instance, ordains his successors, St. Timothy and St. Titus, and he lays hands on them and says to them, remember the gift that you received by the laying on of hands. We find that St. Peter in his epistle talks to the elders in the church and says, remember the gift that I share with you. So Peter is saying, and Paul are both saying, that the next generation received from them that which they received from the Lord. And the Catholic Church believes that that same apostolic authority exists in the church today. And it exists in the ministry of the bishops in the church. And so when we see a bishop in the Catholic Church, we are seeing an apostle, the successor of the apostles. Now, this is pretty amazing when you think about it, but it's absolutely true. For instance, I was ordained by Bishop Robert Baker, the Bishop of Charleston. And Bishop Baker, if he wanted to, would be able to show you his paperwork, his pedigree, if you like. And the bishops can actually trace back through history being made a bishop, consecrated a bishop by this bishop, who was consecrated by this bishop, who was consecrated by this bishop, was consecrated by this bishop, and can trace their history all the way back to the apostles themselves. And the documentation is there, and the evidence is there that there is a clear line of succession from the apostles all the way down to the bishops in the Catholic Church today. And by extension, from the bishops to their priests. The priests are sometimes called the fingers of the bishop. In other words, the bishop is the apostolic authority over a particular geographical region. For us, it's the Bishop of Charleston, who is the bishop of the entire state of South Carolina. He or his predecessors have ordained the priests, and we exercise the bishop's ministry in the parishes. So this is a pretty awesome responsibility of a Catholic priest, that we actually have to bear the authority of the apostles in the world today by virtue and delegation from the bishops themselves. One of the places this is visible and is most moving is when you go to Rome. If you go to Rome and visit St. Peter's Basilica and take the time to explore the place, you can go on a tour which takes you down into the undercroft, or the level below St. Peter's Church. Now, I'll explain this to you for really quickly because it's really interesting, but a little bit detailed and complicated. Basically, as you look at the front of St. Peter's, on the left-hand side, is where you can go down into the undercroft. It's called the scavi, or which is Italian for excavations. Basically, when St. Peter's Basilica was built in the 4th century, the first St. Peter's, not the one you look at now, Constantine the Great, the emperor, carved out a hillside. St. Peter's is set on a hill, and the right side of St. Peter's, as you look at it, sits on a flat terrace which was carved out of the hill, and they used what they carved out from the hill to fill in over on this side to make a terrace to build the whole church on, if you're still with me. In the 1950s, they began to dig underneath there and take away that infill, and they found a 1st century graveyard, a 1st century Roman graveyard underneath St. Peter's. And you can go down there and see it today. They kept on digging and moved further and further back in this graveyard until they were underneath the high altar. The high altar is the altar in St. Peter's with the curly-Q columns and the big canopy on top, a bit like the canopy at St. Peter's in our church of Our Lady of the Rosary. And when they got down below the canopy of St. Peter's, they found an ancient 1st century tomb, and the graffiti on the side of the tomb said, "Here is Peter," in Latin letters. They found some bones there, which are still enshrined in the Vatican, and you can go down and visit, therefore, the tomb of St. Peter below St. Peter's Basilica. And the stories of Peter's death were that he died in the Roman amphitheater, which is just a few hundred yards to the left of St. Peter's Basilica. The archaeologists have told us that's what was there in the 1st century, and that's where Peter died. Now, the cool thing is, when you go and see St. Peter's tomb, as you come out, you can look through the ceiling level, and you're looking up into the floor level of St. Peter's Basilica. And you can look all the way up, and you can see the great dome above the high altar built by Michelangelo. And around the edge of the dome, there are letters 7 foot high, which say, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." It's just amazing. So you're there at Peter's tomb, and you can still see fragments of Peter's bones. And up above, in the dome above, it says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I have built my church." This is one of the surest signs and symbols when you go to Rome of the church being apostolic, because the apostle Peter went to Rome, was martyred in Rome, his bones were buried right there, and his successor, Pope Francis, lives at the same place, exercising the ministry of Peter today from the same location in Rome where he was died and buried 2,000 years ago. This, when you think about it, is quite astonishing that the Catholic Church is the only institution left from the Roman Empire which is still alive and thriving, and that for 2,000 years from Rome, it is still continuing, despite all of our difficulties and problems and human frailty. It is still proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world because of this great gift of it being apostolic. Well, I said that these four gifts of being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic apply on the large scale, but they also apply to you and to me. So I am called, for instance, within my own life to strive for unity. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're like me, you are a contradiction in many ways. You know that within yourself, you have many dividing things that cause division in your heart and in your mind. Maybe you have a particular sin that you're prone to. Maybe you have certain psychological difficulties that you're prone to, things and ideas and attitudes and desires and passions which are at war within yourself and which you're struggling with because we're not unified. We're divided within ourselves. And therefore, when we come into the Catholic Church and seek unity, we seek to be one. We seek to be one not only with the Catholic Church, but we also seek to be one within ourselves. And the healing which Christ brings to our lives is a wonderful healing which helps to rationalize and bring together all of the dividing passions in my heart, all of my dividing desires, all of my divisive will, which are warring within myself, and they come together in unity as I become more and more united with Christ and his church. I'm also called to be holy. In other words, I'm called to be aware of and to be participating in and to be part of God's supernatural work in the world. The more you learn to live by faith, the more you learn to pray and see prayers answered, the more you will understand that God really is at work in your life, that you really do have a guardian angel that is watching over you and walking beside you, that you really do have communion with the saints who are dead and gone before, but are actually still alive and active in our lives, praying for us and being with us. And the more you understand the holiness in the church, the more you will participate in that holiness. You will share in the sacramental vision and see God working in your life and see God working in the lives of your friends and families, working his way in your life to make you more unified and to bring you into this communion with the Catholic Church, which is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. The third aspect is you will begin to share in the Catholicity of the Catholic Church. In other words, your mind and heart will open up to something much bigger than yourself. This is one of the joys of being a Catholic, that it's not all about me anymore, that I can actually participate in this huge universal family, which is Catholic and universal geographically, intellectually, and chronologically, and that I'm actually sharing in this great tradition, this great cultural manifestation by the things that which interest me and which motivate my life. So, for instance, if you're involved in business, your Catholic faith will start to illuminate and instruct your business. If you're interested in the arts, if you're interested in sport, if you're interested in most any human endeavor, you will find that the Catholic Church will inform and enlighten and enrich that aspect of your life. Finally, the church being apostolic also applies to my life because my understanding of the world, my understanding of the faith is illuminated and enlightened by the apostolic teaching which comes to me from the church. The apostolic teaching is handed on to us in various ways. It's handed on to me through the sacred scriptures, which were written and inspired by the apostles. It's it's handed on to me in the teaching of the church, which is apostolic. So when I understand the moral teaching of the church, the ethical teaching of the church, the political teaching of the church, I'm sharing in this apostolic tradition and apostolic authority which the church gives me. And it's actually something which becomes personal, not just global. So I would like to share with you, if you're taking any notes, in the traits of this authority that I'm actually talking about, this apostolic authority. And this is kind of like some subpoints underneath the church being apostolic. And I've put together here some traits of Catholic authority, which makes it convincing and makes it inspiring for us. And these traits that I've set down are 12 different traits grouped together in 6 pairs, which balance each other. 12 different traits grouped together in 6 pairs, which balance each other. And if you wish, I can actually draw these together and give them to you in a handout, which maybe Katie can get to you next week. So first of all, this authority of the church is rooted in history. As I've said, it goes back 2,000 years, and the authority of the church is rooted in history. However, it's also up to date. If an authority is only rooted in history, it becomes ossified, it turns to stone. However, it has to also be flexible enough to be up to date. And the Catholic Church is both rooted in history and deeply historical, but it is also able to be up to date and be applied to the needs of the present day. The second pair is that this authority system is objective. It's not something I made up. It's not something somebody else made up. It's actually objectively true. It follows the objectivity of the natural law, the natural world, and the law that God has given through the 10 Commandments and his teaching. It's objective, but it's also flexible. In other words, it can be applied to the particular needs and exigencies of particular people in particular places. So while it's objective, it's also subjective. While it's objective, it can also apply to me and to my situation. The third pair is, although it's universal, it's also local. In other words, this universality of the church that we spoke about is just as real and just as local as Our Lady of the Rosary Church. It's universal in that it's around the entire globe, but it's also in the local street corner. And for something to be real, you would expect it to have both of those qualities, to be both universal and local. This is one of my favorite pairs, the fourth pair. It is intellectually challenging. Remember, I said it's universal, it's intellectually Catholic. In other words, it's challenging in its theology and its philosophy for the most intellectual of people, but also you would expect that it cannot be purely intellectual. It needs to be accessible to the uneducated. So therefore, you can find Catholics who are the world's greatest philosophers and theologians, but you will also find many Catholics who are faithful, who are perhaps illiterate and uninformed and uneducated. They too are the faithful Catholics and part of the Catholic Church. So it's intellectually challenging, but it's also for the accessible to the uneducated. Another pair is that the church's authority is invisible, but it's also visible. When we talk about the invisible church, we talk about all Christian believers who are baptized. But when we say that it's visible, you can also see the Catholic Church, again, on your local street corner. You can see individual Catholics, you can see individual bishops, individual priests, individual Catholic people, because the church is visible as well as invisible. It's spiritual, but it's also physical. It's human and it's also divine. In other words, it has a divine origin, a supernatural origin, but it's done through human by human action and human thought. This is what we say about the entire church, that it's supernaturally inspired, but it's done by human beings working in history. And so the two actually go together to balance one another. So I'll go back through those again very quickly. That the church is historical, rooted in history, and yet it's up to date. It's objective and yet flexible and applicable. It's universal, but it's local. It's intellectually challenging and yet accessible to the uneducated. It's invisible, but it's also visible. It's human and it's divine. Those are 6 pairs making up 12 traits of this apostolic authority that we're talking about. Well, there, I've rattled